Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Linda Henry, Executive Director and founder of the Globe Docs Film Festival, and I very proudly work at the Boston Globe. We are so pleased to welcome everyone to the opening night of the 2020 Globe Docs Film Festival. This year marks a different kind of festival as we are welcoming you all virtually for the first time. We're able to welcome documentary lovers from near and far in this virtual world. So welcome especially to those who may be joining us for the first time from other states and cities across the United States and across the world. This evening's conversation is with award-winning filmmaker Shalini to discuss our opening night film, Coded Bias. We are so thrilled to have her with us. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, great. We're especially excited to share with all of you that Shalini is this year's Globe Docs Filmmaker Fund Award recipient. Congratulations. This annual award celebrates a visionary filmmaker creating groundbreaking new work in documentary filmmaking. And she is certainly deserving of this recognition. Congratulations. I have a bunch of questions for her about this fascinating film that you just watched. And then we'll be taking questions from you, our audience. So please submit your questions using the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to answer as many as we can later in the discussion. So welcome. Hi. I love this film. Congratulations on this film, and thank you so much for featuring it here at Globe Docs.
First of all, I just want to say thank you so much it's such an honor to be the opening night film at Globe Docs. My first frame of picture was shot in the Cambridge area, and so it feels very full circle to be bringing the film back to the Boston community.
Oh, that's great. So I'm going to start with you for a few minutes, and then I want to get to the film because we obviously have a passion for filmmakers and for the art of documentary film. And so tell us how you decided that this was where you wanted to put your talents.
Well, I think all of my work sort of deals with a fascination with disruptive technology and how it impacts issues of equality. Does it make the world less fair or more fair in how it's used? And so I sort of stumbled upon the work of Joy Buolamwini and Kathy O'Neill, who wrote the book Weapons of Mass Destruction, and sort of stumbled down the rabbit hole of sort of the dark underbelly of big tech and some of the technologies that we interact with every day.
And so before that, but when you first decided that visual media was the best way for you to
I was actually 19 years old, and I was in a village in Bailakupe, which is one of the 10 villages that was gifted to Tibetan refugees. And I was the only lay person in sort of this sea of 700 monks singing this dark-throated prayer. And something sort of hit me in my heart, and I realized that there were stories I could not express in words. And that sort of set me on this journey towards visual storytelling. And at the time, I didn't know anything about cameras. I didn't know aperture or iris or any of those things. But I started to see the world in a new way, and have been engaged in that practice ever since.
And your most recent film before this one, it was also technology based, but it had a much different angle.
Yes, my last film was called Catching the Sun. It was on Netflix with Leo DiCaprio as the executive producer, and it was a film that explored whether solar energy could uplift the lives of working people and middle-class people by putting money back in their pockets. And so it was sort of a utopian look at disruptive the potential of this disruptive technology.
How technology can really help the future, sort of a dream of where it can really be a helpful way for us to move forward.
Yes, and especially working people of color, which seem to be the communities that I care about. And so I am sort of interested in that intersection of disruptive technologies and communities that are often marginalized.
And so where your last film was about how technology could be really an inclusive opportunity for us to move more people forward and to sort of a way to welcome in and have this be an equal opportunity. For this film, we found the exact opposite problem. How was that for you transitioning? You come out and you're working on this sort of positive thing, and then.
Well, I hope it comes across in the film that I am actually engaged in an exploration with each one of my films. I don't start out with a particular thesis. I start out with a question and I sort of explore that. And in this film, Coded Bias, I was sort of terrified by what I found. And, this one, I sort of stumbled into this work quite like Joy. Joy is just trying to make, something like a Snapchat filter work on her face, like an art project work, and sort of stumbles upon the fact that this camera technology does not see her face, recognize it as a face, and sort of stumbles upon this racial bias in commercially available technology that was already being sold to the police, already being sold to law enforcement. And much like Joy, I sort of stumble in with her and go down this journey of bias and algorithms that we interact with all the time.
Did you find Joy by reading about her in the newspaper?
I found her, I'm actually a TED fellow, and I found her work first through the TED community and the TED talk that she gave.
I was trying to give a plug for newspapers in there, but that's, you've also found her.
I have to say, newspapers like the Boston Globe are an incredible source of information. and just to say a plug for this, I mean, my film is really about, also about how much of it has to do with facial recognition, because that's sort of the most visceral and easy for people to understand. It also touches upon how algorithms and AI are literally transforming everything we love and care about as citizens of a democracy. Access to information, a free and independent press, which is the foundation of my work. Everything like fair housing, who gets into college, access to employment, criminal justice. Everything we love, everything we care about is going to be totally transformed by AI, and already is. And that sort of set me on this journey. And it's important to say that how much I rely as a journalist on the work of, as an independent filmmaker, of journalists at the Boston Globe, that we can't rely on what we see on Facebook and on all these other platforms. And now we're seeing how the very fabric of our democracy is based on access to true and accurate information. So I celebrate the journalism of the Boston Globe and of other independent newspapers that are keeping our democratic process alive. I would call you the hero of our democracy.
Yes, thank you.
Real news.
That was a shameless fish story
that I believe wholeheartedly.
One of the things I love about your film is that you're able to do what you were just highlighting, is a number of areas in which AI is impacting, from getting a mortgage to sentencing to admissions. And I thought your example on Amazon was particularly interesting. So everybody just watched this movie, but can you talk to us about the Amazon example?
Yes, absolutely. Well, what I found is that, AI is often this invisible gatekeeper. Oftentimes, the first line of access to an opportunity is often an automated system. And sometimes, even when the technologists have the best of intentions, it can do undue harm. So if you take an example, I think you're alluding to the Amazon hiring algorithm.
Yeah.
And they actually put an AI algorithm sorting system in place to eliminate bias. These technologies had the best of intentions. And what it found, it was programming data that showed historic inequalities. Who had job retention, who got promoted over a series of years. And the AI unknowingly picked up on biases of the past, inequalities of the past. And so anyone that it could discern as a woman, if you had a woman's college, if you had a woman's sport on your resume, it would automatically sort out. So an algorithm that was an AI system that was designed to make the hiring system more fair actually reinforced systematic inequalities. And that was incredible. Something similar happened with a credit score where Steve Wozniak, one of the designers of Apple, he says he has all the same assets, all the same income as his wife. Why did she get a significant different credit score than he did? Well, in the past, women don't have the same access to mortgages, haven't had the same access to credit cards. And so these AI systems that are literally shaping human destiny and opportunity in the future and in the present are literally replicating past inequalities. And that's what I thought was so terrifying, is that even when programmers have the best of intentions, it's still picking up on it's still being programmed based on data that has systematic inequalities. And so it becomes sort of a kind of algorithmic determinism.
You take us also to London, where there's a Big Brother Watch organization that's doing really just trying to raise awareness. And it's a small, scrappy group of people who are fighting this. And for me, that moment that I'm sure all the viewers were also touched by is that 14-year-old boy who was crying because he was just, basically it was stop and frisk. It was this same thing. He was just pulled aside and he was on his way to, he was wearing a school uniform. It was just sort of this moment. It was talk to us about that organization and what you were learning from them.
I have to say, Linda, that, I edited that scene so many times, and I don't think the hair ever stood down watching that scene over and over again, because you're watching a child, a 14-year-old boy in school uniform suit, being apprehended by 5 plainclothes police officers, a Black British boy, and does not understand why he's being apprehended. And he was so deferent, and I just would put myself in, I would be freaking out, and doesn't understand that he's been misidentified by police use of facial recognition technology. Now, what is so alarming about this is that I actually had to go to the UK to actually to get any information at all about law enforcement use of facial recognition technology, because we don't have any laws here in the States. It's being used in secret here in the U.S. For the first time, a Detroit man, it was just found out quite by accident, was held in January, arrested in front of his family and his neighbors, the kind of stuff you don't recover from, and never asked for his license because of police use of facial recognition. And in spite of that, the Detroit police has just announced that it will continue to use this technology. And the thing is that I couldn't get this information in the States. You're a journalist. I probably couldn't even FOIA request to get this information. So I relied on the reports done by Big Brother Watch UK and an organization run by Silke Carlo. And it's important to say that we could only follow that because the police allowed human rights observers. And so we could be privy to a moment like that. And so it's an extraordinary piece of access. And what's so scary about it is that this could be happening here on the streets of the United States of America, and we would never know about it. And that's what's so terrifying about this moment.
It was a really another amazing moment that you captured was in the Senate hearing, where I hadn't seen it before, but Jim Jordan and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez were on the same side of an issue. I hadn't known that. So talk to us about that.
There was a moment in the hearing, and I was, sort of in the audience of the actual congressional hearing. And I remember thinking, wow, sometimes our government works. And there is a democratic process. And I think one of the most poignant moments where Joy is testifying before Congress is hearing Jim Jordan, very conservative Republican from Ohio, say, wait a minute, 117 million Americans are in a police database that can be accessed without a warrant, and no one in an elected office is overseeing this? And to see the Republicans as terrified as the Democrats about how law enforcement is just picking up tools and experimenting with people's rights was a wake-up call to me. It was something so startling. And for me, what was also startling is to say that these technology companies were selling it to the FBI, selling it to ICE. It was already being deployed widely by police, and we don't even know how widely. And they had a big gaping hole. They didn't know that it was racially biased. And it was, I think, I owe a debt of gratitude to Joy Buolamwini and Timnit Gebru and Deborah Raji, 3 young Black women scientists who have so much integrity in their scientific method that they were able to speak truth to power unencumbered by corporate interest. And as a result, in June, you see 3 of the largest tech companies in the world, IBM, Microsoft. IBM literally said they would get out of the facial recognition game. They would not research it, deploy it, or sell it to law enforcement. Microsoft said they would not sell it to law enforcement. And Amazon said they would put a 1-year pause on sale to law enforcement. And this was sea change that we never thought was possible. And it happened because of the integrity of the scientists in encoded bias and the courage that they had to speak about this, coupled with the largest civil rights movement we've seen in 50 years. And I think people started to draw the connection between a movement that celebrates human rights and the inherent value of Black life and racially biased technology in the hands of law enforcement. And drawing those connections, I think, is the beginning of the change that we're looking for. And so I really feel that we're in this pivotal moment. We literally have no laws. I spoke to someone in Europe, and they were just telling me that I can't collect even email addresses in MailChimp the same way because they have laws about consent. And, here in the US, it's essentially a Wild West. Mm-hmm. And what I've seen is firsthand, and hopefully you've now seen in the making of this film, is that every civil right that we enjoy in a democracy is going to be touched by AI. And we still don't have a single line of legislation. And I am very worried that 50 years of civil rights advances could be rolled back under this myth that machines are neutral.
Mm. And the other aspect that you were able to show really well is that there's part of, I think that a lot of people believe that the real facial recognition world is far off in the future. Mm. And then you take us with that wonderful skater woman in China, and you just show us how it's her everyday life. She doesn't use a credit card. It's just sort of all, even buying a can of soda is based on facial recognition. Were you surprised by her attitude?
I was surprised by her. I think it's important to note that China doesn't have a free press. And so it would have been difficult for me to find people who are speaking out against facial recognition in China without putting their lives in danger. I think that's an important note to say of what we were able to access. But I think that, in the film, I sort of set up 3 different approaches to data in the world. You see China, where you see an authoritarian regime that has unfettered access to people's data and are using it in this way to enforce this, what Kathy O'Neill calls algorithmic obedience training to society. And even though, you know, this is sort of for us in the US, we're like, oh, that's a galaxy far, far away. It's meant as exactly that, a black mirror to hold up to ourselves, because we don't have any laws. And in so many ways, there's nothing to prevent these kinds of infringements, whether it be by our state government or a corporation like Facebook or Google. And it shouldn't be up to the tech companies to make those decisions. And so you see, you know, the UK that has some laws that needs to be, you know, sort of flushed out, and you see the US. And I think that China offers this incredible reflection, because even though it seems so far away, how many times have we made a snap decision about someone based on how many followers they have on Facebook or how many likes something has gotten? How many times has our behavior been modified by this invisible hand, this silent nudge of this algorithmic hand in our lives? And I think what's happening in China should be a wake-up call to all of us, because that world isn't far away. And not only that, you know, the big, you know, as Amy Webb sets up, the big AI companies are 9. And that's because they've had a 10-year start collecting our data. So we have this sort of conglomerate, and China is more and more infringing. You see this conversation we're having, even when people want to speak out against China is flexing its power in ways, and also we should be concerned that many of these technologies are manufactured in China, and so to me it's really my hope that we have some sort of data rights as human rights, a universal understanding of data rights as human rights, because our data transits globally.
Mm. I've heard you use the word human-centered technology. What does that mean?
Well, I will say this. I'm so grateful that Coded Bias has been invited to so many human rights festivals and is often seen in the framework of human rights. It's something I celebrate, because human rights is a belief in the inherent value and of every human being, and with it are inalienable rights. And what I worry is that this race to efficiency, of making everything more efficiency, is losing our humanness. And so it is both sort of designing the technology. For me, my mantra is sort of don't leave the tech bros alone. We shouldn't have a small group of people with very elite backgrounds making decisions that are literally affecting the whole world. We need ethicists, we need people with humanities backgrounds, we need people who are dreaming up the Black Mirror episode that could happen. We need a larger swath of society. And then it's very hard, you know, once an algorithmic decision has been made, it's very hard to prove that it's been made. For instance, there's higher view that sort of proves, that sort of says we can do an interview and say by someone's facial expressions, evaluate how apt a candidate can be. Well, a woman had like Botox done, and so her face had different facial expressions, and so the computer AI like said that she was aggressive, right? And so like the thing that I want to question is the times, do we need an AI solution at all? You see COVID-19 happening, right? And you see Google and AI and Apple rushing in and say, we're going to solve this tracking system. We just need to know everywhere you've been and everyone you've been in contact with. And and by the way, there are no laws around this data and who we can sell it to and where it goes.
You're talking about the contact tracing during
the contact tracing, right? This kind of idea. Does that solve the issue when we know that COVID mostly has impacted communities of color? It mostly impacts older populations of people. Is this high-tech solution the one we need? or do we actually need a human one? So I feel like that's the first thing that we need to question, is this race to technological solutions. I would argue that this race is making the 1% even more powerful, and we need more human solutions. Technologists would say that there needs to be a human in the loop that can sort of judge when an automated decision has been made that's unfair. So there is someone that is sort of figuring out when a decision has been unfair. But I think we need to even figure out whether we need an algorithmic system in the first place.
You mentioned that you call them tech pros. Some of them have actually, some of them have seen this film in some of the other festivals. What has their reaction to this film been?
I'm actually very surprised. Many of the people I protest have invited screenings of the film. So like, I think that it's, I'm very grateful. And I say that in a way because at the Sundance premiere, I had technologists from Google. I had the people who invented the Tay robot that went off the handles and became anti-Semitic and racist. I had one of the technologists from that come up to me, and they all love the film. And what they said is, we know this is a problem. This is a conversation we've been having internally, and with Coded Bias, you've made a conversation that we can have with everyone. And that was the highest praise that we can ask, is that it was very humbling for me, first of all, to share this information as someone who doesn't have an AI background. I don't have advanced degrees in this. Didn't know about algorithms 2.5 years ago. And so my work is to be a translator and also to communicate and be a bridge person, because I think the tech people often aren't thinking about that child on the street who are going to be wrongfully. They're thinking, wow, this is going to be great when health professionals can use this to discern.
There's a specific problem, and they're not really
thinking about unintended consequences.
The downstream effect that a lot of it has.
And so
I have more questions for you, but I actually want to bring in some of the audience questions that are coming in, so please keep them coming. One of them is from a viewer named Naomi Allen, and she said, have you seen the Netflix documentary called The Social Dilemma? It's about choosing what to show people based on their clicks. I've heard a lot about this, and it is on my documentary list. Have you seen this?
Yes, we just had an event with them. Jeff Orlowski, the director, is a friend and a colleague from Sundance, and I have seen the film.
How would you connect it to your film?
I think that, Jeff and I both did films about climate change before this, and I know that he has a great commitment to social change. I think we have very different audiences. He's a Stanford person. Tristan is a Stanford person. They both kind of grew up in this world. And so they're sort of speaking to an insider's audience. I think that they're more focused on changing technology from within the corporation and sort of focused on the tech industry. I don't believe that's how change happens. I think that these 3 companies putting this invasive tech down, I don't think it was because somehow they didn't know the harm that they were doing, or they were, somehow unknowing. I think it was because the largest civil rights movement in 50 years happened, and they had no choice but to put it down, and they were pressured. And I also want to say, they're very good people working with these companies. They're very well-intentioned people working in these companies, but also it should not be up to them entirely whether they use invasive surveillance technology on the public or not.
It's something, the power of these platforms is something that every industry is feeling and is subject to the fact that they can change something and bring an entire industry to its knees. They can change an algorithm, and the travel industry can be hurt. They can do the same thing with
election can be swayed. Mm-hmm.
And I think that, again, there are a lot of people that are doing, their intentions are to do well, and their intentions are to solve big problems, and they're having a big impact. But there are other impacts that they have complete control over. That's just never, it's an unprecedented amount of influence and control. And this is one of the ways that it's playing out, is the way you've so beautifully highlighted. I got another question. With most people wearing masks in public this year because of the COVID-19 pandemic, can we expect that to affect the accuracy of facial recognition, or will the technology have evolved to see past the masks?
Well, I'm not an AI researcher, but I'm sure that the technology will evolve to see past the masks. I also will say that protesters have been impacted by facial recognition technology. And if law enforcement can sort of see you at a protest and scan your face and pull up your whole social media profile, do we have freedom to assemble? Is that really freedom to assemble? If you're on probation, or you're on a special program, or you have immigration status, are you still going to go out to protest? And so these are all questions that we need to be thinking about.
In the film, you assembled this fantastic group of women. And there was something that you were sort of referring to them, and they were just brilliant. They were PhDs. They were, really at the cutting edge. And you also they would describe themselves, particularly the woman who wrote the Methods of Math Destruction, Katie O'Neill. She described herself as an outsider in life. And what do you think that connection is?
I think, one, this is the brilliant and badass cast of Coded Bias are some of the smartest people I've ever spoken to in my life. I literally couldn't talk to people at parties for 2 years because I was so scared someone was going to ask me what I was working on. I have to say that in the film, we talk about what intelligence is and how intelligence is defined. And I think the women in my film, and I would call them genius, have two characteristics. They are both incredibly astute, advanced degrees and PhDs in data science and mathematics, and I literally only get 50% of what they say, and 50% is a lot. And also, they have compassion, they have empathy. They had an experience of being marginalized in their life. They were women, they were of color, they were queer, they were Jewish. Something happened where they had an experience of being an outsider somewhere. And somehow that gave them the kind of double consciousness necessary to see in the blind spot of bias. I think that we're having a national conversation about bias. And I just want to share that I don't think it's a few bad apples. I think that we all have human bias. It is innate. It is something we all have, and we all, different degrees of that, but we all need each other to see into our blind spots. And I think these women, one, the power of women and feminism in Silicon Valley is vast underestimated. And their genius is underestimated. And because of that double consciousness of being both misfits and outsiders, but being incredibly astute in the technology, they give us a view of the world that is so unique. And I owe them a debt of gratitude for giving me an education. And hopefully I was able to share some of that with the audiences of Coded Bias.
That actually relates to a question that came through that says, some biases are unintentional, others are not. How can AI help distinguish between the two? I'm not sure what do you think an example of
Well, there is malintent. There are people who want to manipulate these things in bad ways to swing an election or to create, there are people who have malintent when they're using this technology. But what I learned, interestingly enough, when I was doing further study of bias is that, facial recognition has bias, but we all have the same bias. It's actually shown scientifically that we recognize details of our own race with greater detail than we do other races. So that bias, that facial recognition, because it's been trained on white data sets, is something that we all innately have. And so, this process of checks for inclusion, for bias, for harms, Joy likens it to hygiene. It's not something that you do once. It's something that you have to do perpetually, but that makes us all healthier.
Mm. Um, there was Mike Mossberger, who's another guest, just asked, in a just world, I know quite a hope, could AI be used to help in any instance, or is it just a policeman's billy club? So
Um,
is AI a good thing and fair?
Oh, there's tons. I have to say, like, I love technology. I love being able to press my phone and things happen kind of magically and instantly. There's so many great uses of this technology. I just was with Stanford, and they're coming from a whole different thing. They're like, we can detect a stroke just by doing an early vision of your face. Like there's fantastic uses of this technology. I think it's important to say this. The fact that I believe in an FDA does not mean I don't like food, right? It's a belief that we should have a certain standard of quality, and that we have to have a system in place to make sure it does not do undue harm.
Yep.
My film focuses on the undue harm, and in that the people who are most harmed. And so that's my audience, and that's what I chose to focus on. Social Dilemma has a whole other thing that it's focusing on, and we are just at the beginning of this conversation. And so what I hope this does is, this is not a good or bad on AI, it's just a tool. And my questions are really about, what is the process? And in a democracy, what is the process? This has so much power. What is the process of going from a technology company in a lab to our iPhone, to our fingertips, to being the first line of when someone gets into a college? And are there systems in place to make sure it isn't racially biased, isn't replicating gender bias, it isn't anti-Semitic, it isn't, these things can even judge our sexuality. I mean, and so for me, it is really a cry to have guardrails in place around technology, and it's not any indictment in the technology itself. That being said, I also just want to say that our business model, this economic model, is actually, I think, at the root. As long as Facebook and Google have unfettered access to our data with no laws in place and no financial incentive for us, we're going to continue to see abuses of power just based on the economic model.
I think I really like your hygiene analogy and your FDA analogy. It's the the trusting God, but lock your door thing as well. That the guardrails are necessary and they help. And I think that in some ways it makes it easier for technology companies if they know what the rules are. Very carefully, you know what the rules are in a restaurant for health and safety, you can comply if you know it. And so that's sort of a good call to action. So what's next for the film and its release?
Well, it's playing a few festivals, and I'm so grateful to be opening up at Globe Docs, and I hope that you guys will share this with your friends and your colleagues and talk about it at your dinner tables. I want to announce that we will be having a virtual theatrical release of the film 11/11/2020.
Congratulations.
The virtual theater, and it will be rolled out nationally. So it will be 11/11 at the Metrograph in New York, and on 11/18 in your own community, the beloved Coolidge Theater will be hosting it in partnership with Sloan Science on screen and going out nationally. So I hope that you'll join the Coolidge Theater on November 18th.
Oh, that's fantastic. And what's next for you as a filmmaker? Have you identified your next project?
I'm working on a sci-fi that takes some of these issues and puts it into a science fiction and says all the things I can't say in a documentary. Well,
that was actually one of the things that I got out of you and out of the film, is that the role that sci-fi plays in helping us to imagine, right, and helping us to imagine where technology can and should take us. And so I see a really important connection
Oh, absolutely. I think, for me, the problems of the world begin in the human imagination. And I think around these technologies, our imaginations have been limited by this really elite small group of people. And the imagination that we can take it when we have a more inclusive conversation. And I think it's important to say that was something fundamental I learned in the film, that inclusion is not just about sort of like the cherry on top. It actually makes us more competitive. And it's also to say that AI has been directly influenced by science fiction and vice versa. I mean, early AI, Marvin Minsky's lab at MIT was in conversation with Arthur C. Clarke, who did 2001, and Marvin Minsky actually designed HAL. So these kinds of communities have been in conversation, and as a device with coded bias, I rely on sort of tried and true science fiction, the way, everything that we know about AI has been brought to us by the imagination of people like Steven Spielberg and Stanley Kubrick. And I sort of play with that to help us understand how AI is impacting us now, and hopefully spark some new imagination of what a more democratic and ethical use of AI could be for us all in the future.
That is fantastic. Well, congratulations on this film. You're inspiring some really, really important conversations and some different ways to think about AI and its role and our technology and what guardrails we're putting up. We're excited about your release in Boston and your highlight. Oh, there's actually one more question. Is that you point out in the film that a number of cities, including Cambridge and Somerville, recognition. These are technology forward cities that are taking this initiative.
That's exactly right. What's so incredible to me is that the technological hubs of the country, San Francisco, Oakland, Cambridge, Somerville, the people who are leading this technology, who understand the best of what it's capable of, have been the first to ban it in their communities. And that says something about how we should all be looking at this. And so I just want to say, I really do believe in a ban and a moratorium. This facial recognition technology has been proven to be racially biased. And so until we know that it's safe and fair and it doesn't do undue harm, I would be in favor of pressing pause until we have some laws in place to protect the values of a democracy.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for creating this film for us. Thank you for showcasing it with us, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much. It means so much to be supported by the work of the Boston Globe, and thank you so much for your journalism, and I hope people will continue to support independent voices and independent journalism. I'm so proud to be here, and thank you so much for this gracious award.
Congratulations.
It's a great honor, and it really means so much to me.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.